6:31, we have a quorum. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The City of Bastrop City Council meetings are, I don't have to read the executive session. Yeah. She's trained me to read everything. I'm used to doing that. For the audience, because there is not public comment and we are receiving information from staff, that is why we rudely have our backs to you, and it's so that you can all see the same information that we're seeing and you have a better opportunity to hear what's going on. I know it's awkward for our backs to be to you, but that's why. Also, I want everyone to know that item 2C has been pulled and will not be discussed tonight. Item 2C regarding water and wastewater. So if you're in the audience and the only thing you care about is water and wastewater, we have given you the gift of time. So with that, we will start our work session, and we are on 2A, discuss overview of fiscal year 2018 budget process. And our city manager, Ms. Humble.
Yes, thank y'all very much. Tonight we want to start off by, am I too loud, Colin? You're fine? Okay. We're going to start off with the overview of the workshop. We're going to talk about the budget process, the significant need to diversify our revenue sources, and talk just a little bit about that. We are going to discuss proposed use of our red light camera funds. As the mayor's indicated, we have pulled the water wastewater capital improvement program and the implementation of rates until July. We want to talk about proposed building inspection fees, potentially establishing a municipal drainage utility system fee, and input from council regarding additional budget priorities. So with that in mind, let's talk about the budget process. We're going to have an additional workshop on July 20th. I've sent out a scheduler, hoping all of you can check your calendar and we can determine availability. On that evening, we want to talk water, wastewater rates. We want to talk about our capital improvement plan. And we also want to talk about the Bastrop Convention and Exhibit Center across the street. On July 25th, we will receive our certified tax rolls from the chief appraiser. At that point in time, we will have all of the data we need to build the budget. So at this point in time, it's real fluid. We have a list, and we just keeping score on the back of a napkin, so to speak, until everything finalizes. On the 1st, we're going to have a special council meeting. The state law is very clear on the timetable that has to be followed relative to tax rolls. So we have to have a special meeting in order to meet the publication notifications of the state law. On August 8th, I will present the budget to you. I am required to do that 30 days prior to the date that you will adopt the budget, which is September 26th. So we will more than meet that requirement. On August 16th and 17th, we're going to hold budget workshops. The 16th, we'll talk about the general fund. On the 17th, we'll talk about all other funds. What I like to do is on the 8th, Tracy and I will go through the budget in great detail. We'll educate you on what it is, and that will give you time between the 8th and the 16th to study it, list your questions, and then we'll go back through with great detail and help you, as I like to say, eat the elephant one bite at a time without choking on it. On the 22nd, we will hold our first public hearing on the tax rate. On September 12th, we will hold our second public hearing on our tax rate and our first public hearing on the budget. Then on the 26th, we will adopt the budget and set a tax rate in that order in order to meet state law. Yes, sir. And just because some of you have kind of come in late, Colin has requested that we talk pretty close to the microphone so folks at home can hear you.
Do you have this in hard copy?
Yes, it is in a calendar that we put together. I can email it out, and I've also put it on the council calendar.
Okay, and they're working on it, but the council calendar entries that came out today, we cannot respond to. So there's an issue with how they came out. We can't tell you if we're available or not, and I spoke with Andreas about it, and they're working on it. But so you'll know, that's why you haven't gotten any feedback from your council today.
That's fine.
Just a small little IT issue.
And I can probably help him as to what was different today, so I'll visit with him. One of the things that I think is very important as we walk through this budget is to begin to determine our revenue sources, because that has a lot to do, in my opinion, with the decisions that are made and the stress I carry as your city manager. 42% of the general fund's revenue is sales tax, 42%. Sales tax is tied to consumer confidence. When we feel good, we go to the store, we spend a lot of money, life's great. But anytime we have a bump in the road that impacts the economy, that makes us think, wow, I probably don't want to spend that, sales tax begins to decline. And because it represents such a large portion of our general fund, if we were to have a pretty significant drop, then we would have to make some real tough choices. Everything in our general fund budget is important. We're lean. There's no fat. There's nothing to cut. If we cut, we're cutting services. We're choosing not to do something our citizens have grown dependent on. So for that, it's pretty concerning. So as I mentioned, sales tax, whether robust or lagging, is dependent upon consumer confidence. Interestingly enough, consumer confidence fell slightly in May, but it came back in June. Long term, there is some concern as to whether or not people are willing to feel comfortable about that. So we'll have to always pay close attention to that. Our ad valorem tax represents 32% of the projected fiscal year 2018 revenues. In fiscal year 2017, it was 30%. We're receiving regular updates from Bastrop County Appraisal District on the completed appeals. And as I said, by the end of July, we'll have final numbers, but Tracy is monitoring that very regularly. Just so you know, at this point in time, we're anticipating about an 8.3% increase in property tax revenue, but again, that is subject to change with final data. I want to show this just for people that are always interested in taxes. We pay a lot of taxes, but you don't pay as much as you think to the city. Bastrop Independent School District represents about 54.8% of the average home values taxes. Bastrop County gets about 23.3%, and the city of Bastrop gets about 21.9%. And over the last 6 years, you can see that our taxes actually have gone down and have stabilized at 56.4 cents per $100 in valuation. Our tax rate, 1 penny of tax rate equals $87,000 in revenue. And part of what is important, I believe, is to not only diversify our revenue source, but to grow our property base so that our 1 cent increases in actual value. So before I give you a hypothesis, I'm going to tell you we're not proposing a tax increase in 2017. Did you get that, Andy? No tax increase in 2017. But the truth of the matter is if we were to raise our tax rate to 60 cents, we're at 56.4, it would only generate $313,000. And I'm not saying that's a lot of money, but our needs are huge. So even if we raise taxes, it's not going to generate a lot of money. So it's important that we increase our property values in Bastrop so that our penny is worth more. Does that make sense? So that's, for us, an end game. And the way that we can do that is through 2 things, through development and annexation. One of the things that I want to kind of focus on from a perspective of revenue early on, because as I said, at this point in time, revenue is still fluid. So we don't have a final budget. We won't until August 8th when we present to you, but we have had to make some assumptions. And at this point in time, we're projecting that sales tax are going to be flat. And here's why. In fiscal year 2017, we have seen an increase of just under $90,000, which is 2.8% increase over fiscal year 16. So 2.8% is not a lot. But what's really important is that in June, which represent April sales tax is a 2-month decline, or 2 months behind. We saw a $34,130 increase in the month of June. That's 38% of the total yearly increase. Prior to that, we weren't even meeting projections. And Tracy did the happy dance. I don't see her real excited very often, but she was excited that day.
I got to witness that happy dance, and it was quite a thing to see.
Because at that point in time, we're now meeting projections. Prior to that, we weren't even meeting the projections that we had. Elgin and Smithfield, not that it matters, I'm going to Oklahoma to Smithfield, and I got confused when I was doing this, but I'm consistently confused. But it's Smithfield have grown their combined sales tax by $37,473. So if the July report continues to see a robust increase, Tracy and I may debate that, but we're both very fiscally conservative. I'd rather be light and have more money than have planned for more money and not have to make some tough choices. So at this point in time, it's just going to be flat. And the end game for us is to maintain the tax rate that we have in sales tax. So with that in mind, one of the objectives that's important from the city manager's point of view is that we need to stabilize sales tax while we grow property tax. So in other words, we don't want to lose any of the 43% sales tax revenue that we have while we're increasing our property tax. One of the things that I think is wonderful is that with our new DMO, we've got an excellent opportunity to really promote tourism. We've done a great job in the past, but I think we can do some pretty amazing things. Hyatt Regency Lost Pines is a AAA 4-diamond property, and that is a wonderful, wonderful amenity. So for those that are asking, well, what's the big deal about a AAA 4-diamond rating? It represents, I think, about 2.26% of AAA's properties that they rate. So it's at the top of the rating. It is a refined, stylish, with upscale physical attributes, extensive amenities, and a high degree of hospitality, service, and attention to detail. And attention to detail, I think, is what's really important for us to focus on. Because we need Hyatt to bring their excursions to Bastrop instead of sending their clients to Austin. So part of what we've been talking about internally with both Dell Lockett, with the Chamber, with Main Street and all of that is how can we partner together to create some excursions in town worthy of a AAA 4-diamond destination. So we need to work on that. We also have an opportunity to bring sightseers from not only the Hyatt, but from our other local hotels. So one of the things that we are going to put in our work plan next year is how do we potentially utilize a third-party transportation company to help bring the sightseers to town. And so that is one of our opportunities that we want to utilize. One of the things that staff did probably the 1st of May is take a tour as tourist. And I want to share a story with you to kind of give some perspective. When I grew up in Monroe, Louisiana, and when I was there, and just to put this into perspective, I've lived in Texas longer than I lived in Louisiana, so it's been some years. And I tell you that because it made a tremendous impression on me. But the Monroe News Star is the local newspaper, and there was a lady that ran a column. And she ran a column about the blue toilet at 5th and Pine. And why did we have a blue toilet on the corner of 5th and Pine, which is the main entrance off the interstate into our community? Well, it became a tourist attraction, all right, because everybody that read the paper that day went to 5th and Pine because nobody could remember seeing the blue toilet. But sure enough, at the 5th and Pine, there were outdoor storage facilities. And they were built for RVs and boats. But over time, contractors had used them for storing their construction materials. And a contractor had parked a blue toilet in the back of his storage unit and just left it. And it had been there for a long time, and it really disturbed her greatly. And so it was profound to me because I quit seeing it. Drove by it all the time, and I never saw that blue toilet at the 5th and Pine. So that was the story I shared with staff the day we got in the van to tour Bastrop as a tourist. Because I see it not as you do, I see it as new. Because Travis and I, when we came to town to begin to interview Bastrop, we toured this community multiple times, riding every street. And I saw some things that when I began to visit with staff, I knew they didn't see. Kind of like the blue toilet, I quit seeing in Monroe. So with that in mind, we literally became the tourist with a very critical eye. We conducted what's known as a SWOT analysis and identified our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we had a long list, but these are the top 2 that we could all agree on. The first one was we think our strengths are our people, both our citizens, our staff, our council. We believe that we can create a regulatory authority with flexibility based on intent. And I believe we can share that vision with council based on the conversations that we've had. And I know that we're hearing that from the development community, which is critical to us being able to diversify our property tax base. Our weaknesses are we mean well, but we don't do well. We felt like we executed at about that 85%. But that attention to detail that makes us a AAA 4 diamond is that 15% we need to work on. And part of that is we need your help. I am absolutely convinced that my staff works extraordinarily hard, but we got more work to do than we can do, and we need more resources than we have. So this is just part of a work plan that we'll need to put together and work on. Our opportunities, the top 2, there were numerous ones, were the Colorado River and Main Street. And then our threats were sales tax is 44% of our revenue. We're very vulnerable if consumer confidence drops off. And there's no commercial property ready for development. So even if we had a deal to come in today, it's going to take some time to make that ready for development. Yes, sir.
What's the education?
Oh, I missed that. I'm sorry. Part of the one of our weaknesses is we fail to tell our story. We got a great story to tell our citizens about what is the value that we provide with our tax dollars. You saw some of that when you went through the new council member orientation. And all of you commented about, wow, I've learned so much. There's so much that I didn't know. And that really resonated with us because that's a lost opportunity. We need to do a better job of educating the city services and the value that the city provides to our citizens so that they understand what they get for their dollar, but also the challenges that we have. So that was, and thank you for catching that, sir. So we took a tour and really identified that we've got some amazing things that we can build as assets. And we also looked for opportunities for improvement. And it's the little things, the city manager, that just are the blue toilet on the corner of 5th and Pine. They're just some cities I can't visit because I never get to flip that switch. And so these are things that just say we're tired, that we don't see. There are some implications to this that we'll get to that they're not meeting their intended purposes, but signs don't last forever. So much like streets, it needs a maintenance plan. Same thing with extra mowing. This is along the river trail where we want our tourists to go, and there's some opportunities for some additional mowing. And my pet peeve is having to mow concrete. So I appreciate that this is, TxDOT right away, but our visitors drive through Highway 71 corridor all the time, and this is what they're seeing. And so again, it's not a AAA 4 diamond experience for sure. So my budgetary goals, which will also be tied into the work plan that staff is developing, as a part of your retreat, we'll be asking you to do some visioning and some goal setting, and then we'll build the work plan around that. But the 2 goals right off the bat are to position the city to diversify its dependence on sales tax and to grow its property tax valuations through development and annexation so that we can really do what we need to do, and that is to maintain current infrastructure while building new. I see that as kind of the economic development piece of the pie. But good cities do economic development and community development. And so we need to offset Smithville and Elgin's growth and impact to sales tax with increased tourism. We're going to do that through community development. And that is by being the destination for Hyatt, Lost Pines resort excursions, developing that third-party transportation to bring visitors to downtown. And one of the things that I have visited with Sarah about on Main Street that's a priority for our Main Street is a curb appeal with some sitting spots. You know, they're parklets, but there's really not a comfortable place to go get you a cup of coffee or an ice cream cone, get your electronic device and read for a little bit because we just don't have the resources, honestly, to get there and make that happen. So that, I hope, provides for you kind of an overview of where we are as staff and the mindset that we have provided as we are building this budget for your consideration. So at this point in time, we want to discuss the proposed use of red light camera funds to fund traffic safety projects pursuant to Chapter 707 of the Texas Government Code. Are there any questions about my introduction before we move to that item?
Yes, ma'am. Excuse me. Maybe not a lot of discussion, but just a comment on the opportunities. When I look at opportunities, the state park always comes to mind of something we can do to get our state park back on the map. And I think that's something that would be useful for the city of Bastrop.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And to respond to you on that, Bill, just to let you know, there's a group of people, and they're working very hard to put together some sort of golf tribute up there, like a 3-hole course, driving, putting. I know that that's really important to a lot of people in the community, and we're going to be seeing more of that.
Thank y'all. The city currently has $488,479 in the red light camera fund after opting out of the program. The state of Texas and numerous cities statewide were sued, indicating that red light cameras were unlawful, including the city of Bastrop. When Marvin Townsend was your interim city manager, the city of Bastrop joined a coalition of cities that are represented by one attorney. I called and visited with him. And I know that there has been some concern about not using this funding until we get that litigation settled. But we had debated this internally, and I just cannot imagine that the state of Texas is going to refund the money. So I called and visited with the attorney, and I said, look, I'm in a community sitting on an awful lot of money, and we have an awful lot of needs. What is your comfort level? And he's like, I have a very high comfort level. You spend the money, invest it in your community. He said, there are multiple cases. This is going to go to the Texas Supreme Court, in his opinion. It will be years in the making. He said, not really, again, he doesn't see the state refunding their money either. So with that, he's not guaranteeing us we won't have to give the money back, but it'll be a long time in the making, and he had a high comfort level telling me to proceed. It was the attorney, and I have his contact information. I don't know it off the top of my head, but he's the one that is managing the coalition of cities that got sued collectively. The red light cameras are governed by the Texas Transportation Code Title 7, Chapter 707, Photographic Traffic Signal Enforcement System. The law is very specific on how this money can be spent. It may be used only to fund traffic safety programs, including pedestrian safety programs, public safety programs, intersection improvements, and traffic enforcement. So with that in mind, we have, again, been very specific in the programs that we offer you this evening. And one of them is street signage and striping. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Job, who's going to walk you through the rest of this.
All right, thank you. What's really important to realize is the reflectivity of the signs that's missing. That's going to be a state mandate that we're going to have to bring up to date by 2018. Some of the current signs, we've evaluated the cost for the improvements. And again, what's really going to be important is making sure that we meet that reflectivity goal by 2018, which is going to be part of the state law. Pretty much an unfunded mandate that we're going to have to adhere to. Federal mandate, sorry. So as you can see, there's approximately 1,000 street signs. There's 236 named street signs. Of course, there's 4 of those on every corner. That's where we come up with technically 957. But with the estimated cost of about $40,000, some miscellaneous signage, your yields, your speed limits, your no truck signs, it's about another 5. For a new pole replacement, it's close to this, it's actually $102 each. Once I got my quote back today. And assuming they're all replaced, I put a contingency in of an extra $30,000. So that's not every pole, because they're not all bad, but we need to plan on at least changing a few. So that's it. So that's right. So what's important is the reflectivity. And if I'm sure you've all done it. You'll be driving down the road at night, and you try to look at the street sign, and you just can't make it out because it's not as reflective. That stuff starts to fade. It's actually got a thin laminate over the top. It erodes with time. It goes away. There's 2 types of grades. There's an engineering grade. There's a high density, high resolution.
Trey, what's the life expectancy of a sign?
I would say probably about 3 to 5 years, depending on the vandals and the.
When's the last time we replaced them all?
We have not replaced all since I've been here the last 5 years. We've replaced some here and there, but there's never quite the budget to replace them all. So.
Thank you. So when you replace them, is it like you leave all the hardware in place and you put some amazing endurable sticker on there, or do you have to pull all the hardware down and put brand new metal signs up?
So yeah, all these street signs would actually be brand new. They'd be anywhere from 24 by 9 or 36 by 9, depending on the street name. Some of those in Tahitian get pretty totally different signs. So there's quite a few vowels over there in Tahitian Village, and those require an extra couple of inches on the street sign. So what that would probably look like is something with the white background, with the green lettering, with the city logo. And we've also discussed, we're waiting on another mock-up. This is Miss Linda's actual artwork, but we're going to get a mock-up of something that may actually even talk about what neighborhood you live in, or if it's in a historic district or something of that nature. So, but what's really important is that you can see the sign at night, so that you don't pass the stop sign.
Trey,
For instance.
if I'm not mistaken, I think the reflectivity basically about every 3 years. I think the state requires you to change your license tags on your vehicle like every 3 years because they have to be reflective.
That's absolutely correct. And like I said, it all depends on the grade that you buy. There's an engineering grade. There's a higher reflectivity. I can't think of the name right off the top of my head. And so the life, I'd say, is about 3 to 5 years.
One of the things that I want to go back and hit on again that he mentioned is there's going to be an opportunity on that pointed out where you can, go back to the one you were on, about naming the neighborhoods. One of the things I know in downtown is that there was districts talked about at one time, and color coding. And so think about it from a tourism standpoint, that you can actually use that to help with wayfinding. So as we build our tourism and that attention to detail, that these types of poles offer us something that we currently don't have.
So to expand on that, the only actual nationally registered historic district is the Merchant District, which is 2 blocks of Main Street. The rest have been done by ordinance here at the city. So that may be something you want to point out. You want to have a Merchant District. You want to have a historic home district. You might want to have something in the Riverside Grove subdivision. Because there's an awesome park back there that nobody gets to see, but if you have it pointed out on your wayfinder, they know they're there when they see that extra sign in the corner. So it just helps guide you through the city.
Trey,
Yes,
Trey,
sir.
are those quantities that you have listed up there, those that are only under the purview of the city, or does that include the ones that should be under the purview of the state?
So the state, as part of our maintenance agreement, we actually are responsible for everything that comes up to the state right away.
Okay.
They do handle certain things in the maintenance as far as repaving Chestnut, for instance. No restripe Chestnut, but the signage we would take care of. Or if there's a sidewalk issue, we take care of that. We'll be bringing you a new municipal maintenance agreement probably in the near future to work all those details out. They take care of the traffic lights, for instance, but we take care of the stop signs.
There you go.
And then we want to talk a little bit about striping. Again, you've seen it. There's a lot of faded striping all over the place. That little extra reflectivity, because we have the type of lighting along here that's antique lighting to prevent the light pollution, for instance. You don't want to overlight the area and bother the neighborhood, so you just have something nice. You can see about 150 foot of radius. But if you really make sure those glass beads are in that paint and it's nice and reflective, then you're improving the safety of the roadways, and that's exactly what this fund is for. So some of the off-street parking, and you can see our many parking lots that we take care of. And we just striped this one last weekend, for instance, right there, number 6. But there's about 21,960 linear feet of just parking lot and off-street parking, on and off-street parking. So not all these areas are striped. They are used for parking. It would be nice if they were striped. Maybe we could get a little bit better parking down there. Also, stop bars that are faded, the crosswalks that are faded. You can't ticket somebody for jaywalking if they don't know where to walk. So we want to make sure they're crossing at the end of the streets and not the middle where it's unsafe. Again, that's pedestrian safety. And then some additional options for the municipal buildings. If we were to, say, for instance, go ahead and freshen up all the striping in all the municipal buildings, it would be about another $15,000 for a grand total of $89,760. So, keeping with the pedestrian safety, we've looked at some sidewalks that we think will help. If you look at the star, this is just landmarks on a map, but it just happens to be, since I'm the parks director, where all the city parks are. But what's important is getting getting pedestrian traffic off the street and onto these sidewalks. And there are gaps constantly through this area. Some are 3 foot wide, some are 4 foot wide sidewalk. Go ahead.
I was just going to point out that when we did our citizen feedback on the comprehensive plan, this was absolutely one of the #1 items that gets talked about all the time, is the sidewalks are not contiguous, and so people are jogging in the street, there's strollers in the street. This is hugely a thing that was in the comprehensive.
Well, one of the reasons we've talked about that, because since I've been here, we had a lady come that was pregnant and was hit from behind in the roadway. So when we talked about this, she was the point of the conversation. We have a known pedestrian problem that we have been asked as a community to address. And so that's really where we started with her in mind.
Absolutely right. And so what you'll see, like I said, there's different various sizes. So what I did was figure for a complete replacement. Maybe that won't have to happen everywhere, because this area of this is existing sidewalk, for instance, right down Old Austin Highway. It's a great section that's already built, but we just have a few things to add to make it better. So you connect the neighborhood west of the river all the way to the end, up at the north end. And you provide a pedestrian safety for the folks that want to go anywhere in that area from downtown all the way up. Like I said, this area is heavily traveled there at Farm Street. If anybody's been at Fisherman's Park, there's constant joggers and runners in that area, and there's no sidewalk. So sure, it would be a great benefit to go ahead and have that done. And the grand total for that is $396,000.
So you're saying 6,000 linear feet and 6 feet wide. So your intention, I believe that's Pecan Street is one of your...
Yes, and not all of Pecan Street, again, has sidewalks. Some does, some does not. So we would go, but what does not, I figured for complete replacement.
So it may
we'd have
go
a constant
in and out,
size.
but
Yes.
but the intent would be anything that you would put in would be 6 feet wide. Is
Yes.
that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be a much better hike and bike trail. So not only the pedestrian that's walking, but the bikes could ride on there as well. If we could get 8 feet, that'd even be better, but we have to see what the prices come back at. So where I just showed where the sidewalks were, you could actually walk from Jules Park all the way to Bob Bryant Park and 600 Charles Boulevard. That's a pretty good hike.
One of the things that we'll be talking about in our budget in future conversations, probably late July, early August, is Sean has talked to you about the project of, and what are we calling it? The River Loop. And we have been granted some additional funding because the Keep Bastrop County Beautiful won the Governor's Award. So they have $138,000 that need to be used in TxDOT's right-of-way, so they're going to help with that. And we've come up with some solutions that will also address that. And my reason for bringing this up, if y'all choose to use this money for this, this will go a long way to making some connectivity and getting pedestrians off the sidewalk. And then with that river walk loop, this city is very quickly going to be very high on a scale of walkability from a sidewalk. And how safe is that going to be for our pedestrians?
What's that? What is the Riverwalk Loop going to look like?
Is it 6 feet?
Yeah, there's a map.
We'll talk about it because it's not the purpose of the event, but just assume, just briefly, just assume, I think it was, okay. Assume that you are at 150 and by the, is it, what's
75 Coffee
the
Dog.
Coffee
Coffee Dog.
You'll be walking up the service road bridge that TxDOT is going to construct as a part of the 71 improvements. You'll be able to walk up Water Street and walk all the way into downtown, go down to 150 and make that complete loop all the way around the river via a sidewalk. And so that will connect Pecan Park to downtown. It will also connect Bob Bryant to downtown. And so with these improvements, we now all of a sudden only have about 2 areas of town that don't have connectivity, and we're already brainstorming to how to resolve that.
That's right.
And then we also have the proposed project to get up to the state park.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct. So there will be a safe route to walk from one end of the city to the other, hopefully within the next few years. And that's a big priority, like you said, in the comp plan. I know it's also in the park plan. We think it's a good way to start. So again, just to sum up everything, the striping and reflectivity was about $89,760. The sidewalk improvements for pedestrian safety, $396,000. Sign replacement to improve the reflectivity, $90,000. Our total needs are $575,760. And what's in this fund is $488,479. We have a shortage of $87,341. So what we'd like to do is go back, if council's on board with this, prioritize what's important. We may be able to find the money, depending on Tracy's magic tax rate later on, I doubt. But if not, we can certainly make a good start and a good stab at it and make a big dent, get towards that diamond rating that we're looking for.
If you'll go back one. At this point in time, we need some consensus if this is something that you're interested in pursuing, because if you do, we need to include this in the budget, because at this point in time, we're not authorized to pursue this, so we haven't put it in. So we're just looking for some feedback, or y'all perhaps willing to support this, entertain this, so we know what to include in the budget we bring back.
I think it's an excellent idea.
And so do I. It needs to be included, and I'm going to dig back in my archives because I do know we have had in the past a map for conductivity between schools. Now, I've got a map somewhere.
I got one.
You got it? You seen it? Yeah. Okay. But yes, it's a great idea. But we want to kind of stick with the connectivity between schools because a lot of kids in this town still walk to schools.
That's right.
And they have to walk on the streets.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
I'd like to add to that, making all of the exterior basketball goals, just making sure that they're functional, that they're updated, they have nets. So this is the biggest complaint that I've heard with the kids from like 10 to 18 years old is that the basketball courts are really in poor condition. They don't have nets. The backboards are not proper lighting, I know, which is another thing, but You know, we always, that is, before we even talk about doing anything new, it's like the street light, the street signs. They just need to be taken care of what we've got.
Councilmember Jones, the only thing I would caution you on is that would be outside of what we're allowed to spend red light money on.
Yeah, we'll get to that at the last item is going to be your additional budget needs. So I'm making a note and we'll talk about it at that time. But this fund is pretty clear on what it can be used for.
Okay.
So again,
So, wait a minute, the city manager would like to hear from all of council.
All of them, not just 2 or 3 of you. Yes, sir.
I'm supportive of it.
Me too. I concur.
All right, thank y'all.
We like
Appreciate it.
unanimous, yay.
now, okay. So again, we pulled item 2C. Leslie, you're up.
As Wesley is coming up, one of the things that's my understanding, the building inspection fees were presented, I believe, last fall when you had an interim city manager. Several of you probably were not involved in that discussion because you weren't on council at the time. So we are not presuming anything, and Wesley's going to start at the beginning of the conversation and talk to you about proposed building inspection fees, and we'll do it much like we just did the red light camera. We'll walk through it, answer your questions, and then seek consensus for you on this as well. So, Wesley, all yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, so as far as our planning and engineering department's fees that we charge for anything from building a building to developing property in order to build that building, there's a lot of work that's done to get that property in the shape that it needs to be to do all that work. And a lot of the processes and the fee structures that were set up to do that were all kind of set up back in 1995. And I don't know if everybody knows where they were in 1995, but I sure do. And back then I remember my favorite movie came out, Tommy Boy. I don't know if anybody's seen it.
You should not have shared that, Mr. Brandon. I'm not sure.
And that was back when we were dealing with the O.J. Simpson stuff. But back then, the population of Bastrop was about 4,500, and the average home cost about $78,000 to build. And that was when our building fees were adopted, and as well as a lot of the other fees that we charge. Flash forward to today, we've gone through several updates to the building code. We're no longer going under the 1991 building code, which was in place when the fees were adopted. We're now at the 2009 building codes. We use the 2011 electrical code. There's obviously been a lot of changes in building technology. It's a much more involved process to approve a building plan for construction, as well as the inspections that go along with it. And
Why is that? Why is it more involved?
because the requirements in the codes have changed. The quality of construction has really changed, and the requirements that applicants have to show on their plans and cities have to review and approve has changed.
Okay, thanks.
One of the things from a fire-related standpoint, the synthetic fabrics and things you find in a house, the fire industry fights fires very differently today than it did just 30 years ago. And part of the International Fire Code is overseen by a group that factors that in. So every year that one of these codes come out, it's factoring in additional life safety measures and additional things that are intended to improve our quality of life. And that takes time, it takes energy for staff and the building community to make sure all of those are met. So that's really what is important as to why the fees have not kept up with the codes. The time that Wesley would spend in reviewing a set of plans for a 2009 set of codes versus a 1991 set of codes will be different, measurably different. And that's really the point.
Thank
would have been a good example. I could have brought you a set of plans that we would have reviewed back in 1995, and they'd probably be this thick, and today they're this thick. But that being said, those costs and that effort that's required to review and inspect those projects has all increased, but yet we're still using the same fee structure that we used 22 years ago. And so just that's kind of going into why we need to update our fees. We've based them on old codes that are not the industry standard that we use today. And we've also have other sets of fee structures that are charged for the development of the property before the building is actually built. There's also a lot of work that goes into that. There's the subdivision platting process. There's the infrastructure construction process where they're building all of the public utilities and other services that will accommodate that development. Those have not been updated since 1999. And as Ms. Linda said, we did present this to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Construction Standards Board, as well as City Council back in September of last year. So going into the way our fees are set up and the prices that we charge for those fees, there's kind of two basic approaches you can take to that. You can take the easy route and just say, what is everybody else charging, and pick a number and charge it based on that. Or you can go in and really study what your department does and what kind of services you provide and what those services cost to provide. And so we went through that process, and we ended up splitting our the services that our department provides into four main categories. The building service area would mainly include all of the work that's involved with going vertical, starting at the ground, building construction, that is what you see at the end of the day. The development process that we use is everything from the ground down. We would start with all the legal work that's done to prepare that property for development, and then there's the work that goes into actually developing those improvements. And then the internal and community service areas are the areas where we're either working with other departments to provide services to help them do their jobs better, or working with the community to make sure that they're getting their needs met. But these are two areas that we spend a lot of time and effort on, but we don't necessarily gain revenue from that. And so just speaking about revenue, our 100% of our revenue comes from either those building projects or those development projects, and it's split up. We get most of our revenue from the building side, and then you can see on the expenses side, it takes up, the building and development areas take up about 63% of our cost of service. When we split up all of the different budget categories that we have and estimate how much time our personnel spends on individual pieces of those projects, that's about what it comes out to be. And so it ends up being about $440,000 a year.
Mr. Brandon, I think Councilmember Jones has a question.
How much if you're going to build a house, let's say like 2,400 square foot house, how much would your total fees be typically? If you could.
I've actually got a slide. One of my later slides actually shows that.
Mr.
I
Brandon,
can't remember off the top of my head. So
before you leave this slide, my question is this 186,000, is that based on last fiscal year, an average of the last 5? I'm just trying to get a feel for it. Do you have a trend? Or is this just last year?
It's based on the last 3 budget years.
Okay, so it's an average of those 3?
Ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
And it ranges, I think our current budget, we're tracking to be right at 200,000.
So you're saying that we're bringing in 186, we're spending 606.
That's right. And so if you break it out by
Got it.
Wouldn't it be better if it was the other way around?
Yeah, and that's why we break it up, and I talked about those different service areas. Normally you would not want to have taxpayer money subsidize the development and building piece of what we provide. So it's roughly $420,000, so we're subsidizing $230,000 roughly. So this is just a quick slide. I won't spend too much time on this, but this just kind of describes the process that a developer would go through if he's starting at the very beginning and working his way through the process in order to start building buildings. It could start out at the zoning process, but then it can go through the different steps, whether it be a preliminary plat and then the public improvement plans that we review and approve. And then once we get to the building process, it's just a matter of getting the applications submitted. We review the plans, we approve them, and then we issue the permit, and then we go through the inspection process and issue the certificate of occupancy. So just over the last 3 years, this is a summary of the different permits that we've issued. We've issued about 200 residential permits, 40 commercial permits, and in total, we issue a lot more permits than it takes it takes more permits to actually build the building than it does for just say that new house that's being built, because there's a lot of different steps that we go through during that process and we issue permits to different subcontractors such as electricians and plumbers. All of those trades get issued different permits, and then we inspect the property as well during the process.
And Mr. Brandon, just in case everyone's not familiar, the reason that the inspections number is so high is because you may issue an electric permit, but that same permit will require a number of inspections before that permit's closed out.
That's correct. I think it's on my next slide. Yeah. So this is a list of the most common permits that we issue. But yes, a large commercial project would normally need roughly 38 different inspections through that process. And so that's why those numbers seem really high. A new house normally takes about 25 inspections. So we actually visit the site and look over and make sure everything is being built according to the code. So just getting into the structure that we feel would be more representative of the cost for each point in the process, as well as creating a structure that remains competitive with other cities. With the subdivision process, we're proposing a structure that would increase the average fee per developed lot from $408 to roughly $741, which is seems like a lot, but again, we haven't changed the fees since 1999, and so it's probably a bigger step than it would probably need to be, but it's still well within the average cost that most developers have told us is what they assume they would need to pay. The developers we talk to say that they factor in between 3 and 4% of their development costs related to the review and all the work that goes into getting that infrastructure built.
Mr. Brandon? I know that the mayor and I sat on P&Z when you presented us those charts, comparison charts. Are you going to show us any of those?
Yes, sir. I'm going to get to the pictures. Yeah, just a second. Those are definitely easier for me to. So there's 3 main types of fees. We charge fees for the subdivision process, and then for commercial properties we have what's called the site development process, and this is a little different than the building process, but again it's all related to that from the ground level down work that we do to get the property to where it needs to be before they actually start building the building. And this is one piece that we have very low fees for, but we spend a lot of time and effort working on. we spend a lot of time inspecting and reviewing plans, and so we're proposing a structure that would increase the average fees per acre of development, of commercial development, from about $120 to $784. And that will certainly vary depending on the size of the project. We're actually going to propose a different fee for what we call a small site, which would allow for projects that are doing very minor improvements to their property, such as expanding their parking lot a little bit. They would have a much lower fee than what we're showing here.
So does that proposed increase completely cover the expense?
Yes, ma'am. And then with the building permit fees, we break those up between single-family residential and then a separate group for multifamily and commercial. And it's roughly it's roughly 2 times what we charge today. And it's mainly comes down to how we assess the value of that project. When we get into building permits, one of the most common ways to assess fees for that project is based on the valuation of that project. And we're going to propose to change from a policy of using the declared value to a more objective cost basis that's presented by the International Building Code. They actually go through and define the average building costs for different types of construction. And by basing the fees on that, it's much more objective, and it's much more consistent.
So what you're saying is if you add a room, it's not going to be $13.94, but if you add 5 rooms, so
that's right.
Cost would escalate.
That's right, because the value of the project tends to be one of the best ways to correlate the effort that it's going to take to complete that project, which would translate into more effort that's required to review and inspect the property.
Gotcha.
And then another kind of issue that we have is there's a lot of work that we do that we simply don't have fees for today. And so we have no way to charge for it. And so we're proposing a list of different types of fees that would help cover the cost of that type of work, which helps because it keeps us from having to raise those other development fees as much. And so, we went through a full cost of service analysis, but at the end of the day, we still want to know how we stack up to other cities. And so the way we did that was took a handful of cities within the area and compared the total cost, and I included all of the different costs that are major factors in the cost of a development so that we could get a full picture of how those fees relate to each other. And so you can see our current fees are, roughly here a little less than $7,000, and our proposed fees would still be, even with that increase, would still be well within, I would say well within that competitive range of other cities. So the cities we studied Buda, Manor, Kyle, and Hutto. Those are the cities.
Are the fees for Kyle fairly recent?
I don't know off the top of my head. Some of them are more recent than others. I know, I want to say it was Kyle. They have not updated their tap and impact fees, which you can see is the gray bar. It accounts for a lot of the cost. And so many cities try to offset that by reducing fees in other areas. And so that's why I thought it was important to show you this full picture that would show that cost to get property from its vacant condition to a full build-out condition, and what those costs would be per lot.
Do you have any comparisons with Elgin and Smithfield?
We did. They were a little harder to compare to, but we did have those comparisons. Can't remember off the top of my head how we compared with that.
Are these areas that you noted growing?
Yes. And that's one reason we wanted to, we kind of picked the cities that, I wouldn't say they're who we want to be, but you can tell just by their rate of growth that they're doing something right. So
I'd point out to council that the Austin Chamber of Commerce invited some regional mayors that they thought had things in common and were seeing kind of growth. And so I sat on a panel with Kyle and Hutto, both. So I think they're representative of if a developer was trying to choose, they would be more likely to be choosing between Bastrop and Hutto, Bastrop and Kyle, that those types of developments, as opposed the choice is not generally between Bastrop and Smithville. It's different developers, different kind of projects. Their towns are in a different stage in my opinion, and apparently in the Austin Chamber of Commerce opinion as well.
So this is for residential, and then commercial, you can see it's about the same case. We would still be, even with the proposed changes, we would still be well within that competitive range of what other cities charge. So when we get down to what actual difference would we expect to see, we mentioned earlier that, you know, if our cost of service in those two service areas being about $420,000, the general fund is subsidizing those costs by approximately $234,000 a year, which equates to almost 3 cents of our tax rate. And so with that new fee structure, we would anticipate it increasing our annual revenue to roughly $440,000, which would kind of flip that to where now those fees are generating enough revenue to cover those costs.
Would it be reasonable to think that the increase in fees might facilitate more staff? Or it doesn't really, I mean, they would not facilitate, but it would allow for that type of...
Well, the way I would look at it is excuse me, it now pays for itself. In the budget I will be proposing, I am going to have a request for one additional staff person to put back a director of planning and zoning. When we present the water, wastewater, and the capital improvement program next month, you will underscore why we need the help. Between Wesley and Trey, we have asked for miracles, and they deliver every day, but they're not Jesus, and they need a life, and they are really, we're at an 85% because we're doing the best we can with what we got, and it's never enough, and so we're juggling priorities. And so, to your point, will it allow us to hire some much-needed staff in a specialty area? There will be a request for a staff person in the planning and zoning, yes. At this point in time, we need some head nodding, and then Ms. Tracy would like to implement these rates as soon as y'all would hit the go button. So we need to stop the subsidy and the bleeding as soon as possible.
I agree with the rate increase.
As do I.
Yeah, as Councilmember Ennis stated, we approved it when we were on planning zoning a year ago, so we still think it's a good idea.
Yes.
I'm good with it.
I'm on the side of Jesus and Jesus Jr.
Thank y'all.
Stephanie.
Mayor and Council, our next item is to discuss the need to establish a municipal drainage utility system fee to fund numerous drainage maintenance and improvement projects pursuant to Chapter 552 of the Texas Local Government Code. Last Tuesday night, I thought Steve, Trey, and Wesley did an amazing job of presenting to the community a level of proactive preparedness that we are striving to meet. And I think there were a couple of very informative slides that I want to draw our attention back to as we take this journey to understand the need for the request we're making. When they showed me this slide, it was pretty amazing to me, because Gill's Branch is this purple right here, and it represents about 2.8 square miles. And then you look at Piney Creek Watershed, and wow, it goes all the way up to 290. in the Elgin area, and a lot of water drains out of that watershed into Bastrop before it actually ends up in Piney Creek and drains to the Colorado River shed, which greatly impacts the Piney Creek watershed. Councilmember Schiff took me out there and showed me, and the most amazing thing to that is it changes the flow of Piney Creek. It might flow out to the river until the river backs up, and then the river will actually flow into the creek. So it greatly impacts how Piney Creek drains and its impact to our city. We talked about the rainfall comparison last Tuesday night and what is an engineer-designed storm. And in our city, we are designed for a 25-year flood event, although there is some infrastructure for a 100-year event. And Wesley walked through why some of the recent storm events caused flooding, because frankly, we're not designed for the type of event. And he used his bucket analogy. Bucket holds a certain amount of water, and depending on how quickly that bucket pours out depends on how the system manages the water. So just as a reminder, these are your 100-year infrastructure items as well as your 25-year infrastructure. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Trey, and I want you to remember this. The number one item that we have to manage is drainage. It's the number one concern y'all bring to my attention always is drainage. I think that if I were to ask for something that would get a very high majority of the people agreeing on, and that is we have drainage challenges and we need to do something with the drainage. And so as Trey walks through this, I want you to remember that he's also over public works, he's also over the parks, he's also over right-of-way mowing, and oh, by the way, drainage. And the way we're structured today is it's a tug and pull. You don't get all of those. You just decide which one of those you're going to get today. So even when you give us resources, we don't always have the ability to stay focused. This drainage fee, or this drainage system, is a dedicated source of funding that can only be used for drainage. So as he walks you, I don't know what happened, but as he walks you through the rest of the program, think in terms of now we have a potential solution to a real problem in the community.
Okay, so again, we talked about this slide Tuesday night, and 77 properties were affected by this storm event in May of 2016. Some of these can be fixed with that major capital improvement stuff that we talked about, but the main thing to look at here is the type of work that was the small, local things of this nature. So what we find as we go through town, stuff was built without proper drainage. There's a home that popped up. No one ever put in a culvert. They just simply put their driveway in or drive through the ditch or something of that nature. And those kind of things were never addressed. So our recent areas of work, if you remember, we talked about the prehistoric beaver in the area that we're cleaning out here in Gills Branch. And what we had to do to get this cleaned up, just in case there was a rain event, was stop working on Spring Street. So if anybody has driven down Spring Street in the last 2 weeks, it looks exactly like it did 2 weeks ago, with maybe a little more dust, because we haven't been able to get to that because we're doing this. Not that this isn't important, and Spring Street's important, but we just need to remember there's only a few of us together that can get this done. So again, not only that, council made a decision last year to purchase this piece of equipment, which is a great piece of equipment, but it was about $260,000. The best thing we could do for that piece of equipment is run it every day. You've made an investment. We need to follow up with that investment and make sure that we have this thing running as much as we possibly can. You can see the work that it can do. The difference before and after is amazing. While again, it may not take care of that gigantic flood because this is built for a 25-year storm, it sure does make the water, one, it makes it look a lot nicer, and two, it makes the water probably give you another 2% less than.
So are you, in that slide, is that the before and this is after, like that was full?
This is before and this is after.
Okay.
So this is Pine Street. This is Emile Elementary right over here. again, just a shot of it. But not to forget, we're still working on these capital projects that we talked about with Half and Associates. We went over all this the other night, the amount of projects, the list, the things that we're still continuing to do. This fee is not for that. This fee is for the steady maintenance to make sure that this ditch looks like this on a continued basis. Some of the things that we're going to have to do is for the basis of the funding is you need to think of this as a drainage utility system. So it's exactly like your water or your wastewater system. It's only used for that system. You pay a fee. It's not a tax. It's a fee that you absolutely pay for a service that you're getting. So what we would do is create a separate fund, which can only be used for drainage purpose. Provide rules for the use, operation, financing of the system, and to protect the public health and safety from the loss of life and property caused by surface water overflows. These are the three areas that we came up with as far as maintenance zones. And this first year, we're doing a little bit of guessing because there's a lot of work to be done. We are hoping to get through all of these zones within a 4 to 5 year period completely. Once that's done and we figure out just how long it's going to take, it'll get easier. It'll get better because you won't have to replace the culverts every time. You won't have to pour driveways back. That'll all be done. And what you'll be is just keeping a constant maintenance. What we'll do when we're not doing this 40 weeks worth of minor and maintenance improvements, such as cleaning the channels like you saw examples of, or replacing driveway culverts, or doing detention pond maintenance, is we've got an extra 12 weeks in there just in case something happens. There's 6 weeks of system maintenance and inspections, but we'll also be able to GIS a lot of things that aren't on maps now, so we have a good running inventory of what's there and what's not. We'll do some pre-storm activities if something's coming. We're going to spend 2 weeks to make sure everything's clean and clear, and then we're going to be able to have an adequate amount of time to go back and make sure it cleans up afterwards. So it's real important. I know there's 52 weeks in a year, and we're going to work all 52, but the first 40 we're going to be spending just on the maintenance, and the rest we're going to fill in with those other activities. So to coin your phrase, this is basically yard art, and you can't use it for anything except you can't use it for drainage. That's
Not
obvious.
transporting a lot of water. Is
Right.
it?
It's not taking care of a lot of water. So this is the kind of stuff I was talking about that you see all over town. People come in, they drop it, they buy a culvert at Lowe's, they throw in a little crushed granite, and they're done. And we don't know about it. It's not. It just happens. But this has been going on for 40 years. So there's a lot of this all over the place that we have to fix. And this kind of stuff takes time and materials, which is, again, why we're getting to the fee. If you look at our timeline, with the 200 days in the year, just like we had talked about, there's going to be ongoing maintenance all the time. And what we'll do is we'll start in those zones. We're going to start at the outfall. We're going to work our way uphill. That's the way it's got to be done. We're going to try to get through as much of it as we can. I said the first year, we're certainly going to work at the priority points in all 3 zones to make sure that the water can get out as quick as possible. Because let's face it, the people at the bottom of the hill are going to flood first, so we want to make sure the water's moving out of there as quick as it can. And then we would have, for instance, 60 days of ditching and cleaning, 30 days of culvert replacement, and this is a broad example of what will be going on, and we'll be more specific about activities.
It's broken out, it won't be necessarily continuous.
That's correct. So, and this is what you'll be doing all the time. For instance, give you an example, just so everybody knows. Traveling down Main Street, there's a storm sewer on Main Street. All the streets that feed into Main Street, there is no storm sewer. There's some open ditch. There may be some storm sewer. You may have a culvert. You may have a curb. It's all mixed. You may have nothing. It may just absolutely be flat. So the water's draining right down the edge of the road. The road's eroding away. That's another thing. This is going to save you on your street maintenance in the long run. Making sure the water doesn't sit on the street, you're actually putting more money to the good as far as street improvements. So anyway, what we'll do that first year where it's going to be tough is making sure all of those side drains drain into the storm sewers that are available. Again, we have our other weeks that we won't be doing the drainage and maintenance, and how it's broken up: the pre-storm activities, checking the major bridge crossings, cleaning and clearing debris if we need to after a storm, and making sure everything's ready to go. And even we have a little time in there for staging barricades and getting stuff ready just in case there's an emergency. So the proposed utility system annual budget would be $350,000. That brings another three full-time employees on. What we'll do is we'll take one that's in Public Works now, who currently operates that machine, give him 3 people to help. They run a dump truck, one to make sure the grade's right, one to have a tool truck, that kind of thing. And we're going to need to buy supplies and materials like we talked about. There's going to be a lot of culvert replacement. There's going to be a lot of end treatment. There's going to be a lot of backfill. There's going to be a lot of dirt to haul off. That's something that not everybody thinks about, but all of a sudden at $20 to $40 a load and the travel time, that takes a big chunk out of your day. So this would require an assessment fee of anywhere from $7 to $9 per person. And it would be assessed on every water account per service unit.
I don't think you meant per person.
No.
No, not per person, I'm sorry, per meter, basically.
Just trying to help you out.
Why
there.
would you not,
Or is it typical to do it per account versus per value of property? When we do fees.
We'll do it per property, because every property has to be assessed drainage because it's required to drain. Part of the reason for the conversation tonight is there's a lot of those kinds of things we have to work out, but we didn't want to spend the time on it if y'all weren't interested in doing it. So tonight is just, are y'all willing to support this concept so that we can carry on and bring you back more specifics for y'all to debate? But if y'all were just going to say, nope, we're not doing this, then we don't want to spend the time necessary to answer those kinds of questions, because you need to be able to assess commercial different, because their impact on the system is different. But that's I won't say a complicated calculation, but it's a sophisticated calculation. And it's going to require some real brain time dedicated to it. So those are things that Tracy are looking at from an option standpoint, but again, unless y'all say, yes, we're interested in pursuing this, then we can't give you a lot of those specifics. But we do know that just by raw math, it works out based on the number of meters that we have, $7 to $9. But
So let me ask you this. So, I mean, I'm willing, and I think it's very necessary. Would it be at all reasonable to look into, in the future, A, tying it to value, or B, tying it to usage?
It would be. So that's what they're doing with the service unit equivalency. Basically, if you have a 3/4 inch meter, that's 1 SUE. That's your average home, and your fee would be somewhere in that range. Now, we haven't worked out all the details, but it's $7 to $9. Okay. If you're Buc-ee's, for instance, and you have a 6-inch meter and you have 100 SUEs, that's what you pay. So it
Is that per month or year?
Yes.
Per year.
Per year, I'm sorry. No, it's per month.
Per month.
It is per month, I'm sorry.
Wouldn't be much. Yeah, it wouldn't be much if it was per year.
So what that will do is, and we'll have to base that, because obviously there has to be it has to be fair and evenly spread, but we're doing it by SUE is a good way to start. So I know you're going to ask for that head nod. I'm just
well, what we need to do at this point in time is to tell you the work that's required and why we need some head nodding. In order for this to work, we need to figure out how we would allocate the charges so that it's fair, how we would bill the fee, because not every property that would be assessed has a meter. We need to educate the community, so there would be some videos and things like that to run on the cable channel. We'd have to establish the system, which means we have to write an ordinance and we have to be clear on our intent. We also want a high level of accountability built into this, because we appreciate that we are asking for citizens who have other options to spend their money on. We want to ensure that they get their money's worth. So part of what we need to do is we've worked to give you what we think is a good start on what work would be needed, but part of our accountability is you don't know what you don't know until you go do it. So as Wesley and Trey work through this next year, we're going to make a pledge to you in the community that on a very routine basis, they'll be making presentations to you with pictures. One of the things that I said to Trey is that when somebody says, how come you're not working on drainage, every day you're going to be able to point to where they're working on drainage and they can go and look. And then we will modify the work plan the first year, and that may change the 5-year window and push it back, because every time Trey and I ride through town and we debate this, there are areas that have no drainage. Until he gets in there, he doesn't know what he's going to be working on. A block may do this, and so they may have to spend several days on a block just trying to get it to drain. They may go to the next block and it's no big deal. So again, you don't know what you don't know until you get there. So we know we've got quite a bit of work to do. And what we need is, yes, this is something of interest, and then we'll come back at the July meeting with a more refined plan of action, scope of work, timeline, and expectations to help begin to educate our citizenry if y'all are supportive of this. But again, it's a workload capacity. We're going to get there and the end game's going to be, no, we're not really interested, then we've got other thing to do.
I think I like the trend that I see where we are supporting what we're providing. I think that's fundamental. It costs what it costs, and there's no free ride. My interest would be that it eventually be tied to value. So if you want to live in a big, expensive house, you're going to pay more. And if you have a modest budget and you're living in a more modest home, I personally think that it should be tied to that. And as far as being equal all the way across, I don't necessarily agree with that.
So I have done some preliminary. Studying of other fees at other municipalities, and it's usually tied to impervious cover, which means most residential, they would really be paying the same fee irregardless of the value of their home. And then your commercial is going to have a higher rate due to their impervious cover. So that would be a very more sophisticated way to calculate it, but that would require a consultant coming in and doing all of that work. So.
Councilmember Jones, I would offer, just from my engineering background, that your water bill, if you have 5 times as many bathrooms, then your water bill is going to be higher, and you've made that choice. But the rain comes from God, and it comes on all houses at the same time, and the drainage, the elevation is a known thing, and it's the same, and the impact and the usage, to use your word of a usage, it doesn't matter if you have, if that impervious cover is the same, if it's a 1,200-foot impervious cover, whether it's 2-story or 1-story, or how expensive the utility, how expensive the outside is, or none of that changes the cost of what that drainage would be. Your usage hasn't changed. So the impervious cover makes a lot of sense to me, that rather than being tied to the value of the home. And I would let Tracy speak to it, but the other thing that I have a concern about is, then are you having to adjust the fee every year, or how often are you adjusting it based on the valuation of a home? Every time the appraisal district changes, then do you have to recalculate every one of the fees? So I very much appreciate the usage, but I would say, from my perspective on drainage, the usage is impacted by impervious cover more than anything else.
Yeah, the most, what's seen to be the most direct way to assess an impact to a drainage system leaving a property is by impervious cover. Because when you compare a vacant piece of property, it's going to produce much less runoff than what a fully developed commercial site on that same property would create. And so that's the direct impact to the drainage system that we're having to deal with and address. And
so if you need 500 concrete parking spaces, then...
Well, to be clear, I'm speaking specific to residential. Okay? Yeah. That's what I'm speaking to, is residential.
I think I hear what you're saying is, for some folks, that $7 to $9 a month is going to be a big hit. For other folks, it's not. And so we need to keep that in mind when we're,
And be as fair as we possibly can.
be as fair as we possibly can.
Oh, and a roof is more impervious, a larger roof.
My thought on this is, I mean, this is a city service that we're providing, and I think you can look at this two different ways. You can look at it, you know, you either pay for the service based on your use of the service, which means how much impervious cover, or, you know, you could make the argument following the discussions that we've had that, gee, you know, I live downhill from everybody, and so anything that I add goes, in fact, I do, personally, it goes right to the river where I live, and I'm not causing anybody, well, I suppose maybe down, if you looked at the Colorado, but as far as, you know, Piney Creek and Gills Branch and everything else, hey, I don't want to pay a tax at all, I don't want to pay a fee at all, because I think that's the wrong way to look at this. I think the way you look at this is no different than providing the services that the city provides. The direction, what I'm hearing from Deborah and from Bill, and I agree that some people are going to find this is no big deal, and other people are going to say, where's that money coming from? Even if, you know, it may be a small amount to us, but it might be a huge amount to somebody that's just living on the edge. I think we're at a point in the discussion where we really need to think, you know, is this a tax? Because that's really what we're getting down to. You're talking about ad valorem, you're saying based on value. And so if this is a city service based that we pay for based on our own personal investment into our property, and the people that have invested more in their property typically can afford more than those that have invested less, does this make sense to take a look at our tax valuation instead of doing this approach? Just say, why don't we bump the tax by, what do you need? You need, you said it's $80,000.
We need $350,000.
And that's what did you say, 4.5 pennies?
That puts you over the 60 cent.
Well, but I'm saying we don't have to do that all in one tranche, but if we said...
And your finance director is going to have a heart attack because it's going to put
She's
you over
already
your
got-
rollback rate.
Well, I'm just saying, if we knew that this is the approach that we want to take over the next few years, we could ratchet up a penny a year until we get to where we're there, or...
One, that doesn't get you the 350,000 that you need. And two, where I grew up, I lived down there from everybody. I grew up on the coast. So literally whatever you did actually could affect me in the Matagorda area. So, and what we have down there is, because we're 2 foot above sea level, is drainage districts. What that is plain and simple, is a utility. They put in the infrastructure, there's concrete lined ditches, there's culverts, there's pipes, there's pumps. There's people that make sure that when it rains, the water doesn't spill over the levee because they're pumping it out. This is the exact same thing, it's just based on a gravity, maybe more like a wastewater system than a water system, but essentially it's still a utility. That's exactly what it is. It's somebody that requires its own maintenance, its own infrastructure, its own equipment, its own expertise, its own everything.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing. Not disagreeing with that at all. The question is this a universal service that the city provides that is not geared on a value per meter? Is this a service that we provide that should be a value per property valuation? You know, I don't know that I have the answer, but I'm throwing it out at the council saying, I think there's really 2 ways you can look at this. You can either look at it and say, let's do an assessment and everybody gets hit the same. If you got a residential meter, a 3/4 inch meter, this is what you pay. Or do we somehow try to build it in to a tax structure so that it's based on value?
We have precedents here in our sewerage fee. We've already got that fee over here that takes care of that part of the city structure, or it may not take care of all of it, right? It probably takes...
Right. Well, it's the impact fee, for instance. It takes care of making sure that we have the infrastructure there to grow. So your impact to the system is what you're paying for. And it could be this could turn into the exact same thing.
And
eventually.
we've just gotten by through the years, not having this fee for the drainage portion of what the city's doing, correct?
That's right.
Well, I'm going to say, I think it boils down to expectations. I think the community expects their 25-year drainage system to work, and it doesn't. I think the community expects the creeks to be clean, and they're not. I think the community has endured a number of floods that now every time it threatens to rain, we deal with post-traumatic stress. It's real. It's real.
Yes.
And I can tell you it's real because my husband and I have sat in the parking lot out here because over some holidays, we had some citizenry that were truly scared and wanted Public Works to be parked here. Well, I wasn't going to bring in staff unless it was necessary, so we cut our plan short and we sat out here and watched it rain because I'm not going to minimize the concerns of our citizens because they're real. So the bottom line is that this is a real need. It's the number one need. I am not at all confused, again, that I could reach consensus in this community that this is a real threat to us. A drainage fee is a universal way to manage a drainage system. It's a consumption fee, just like water and sewer. Not all of your taxpayers necessarily use the system, but the people that use the system pay to maintain the system. And right now, we are woefully staffed, resourced to be able to provide a level of maintenance that our citizenry flat expect to happen. And I think what Trey has said to you is I was in the middle of paving Spring Street when the National Weather Service indicated 2 tropical storm events in the Gulf of Mexico, and they were anticipating from Corpus Christi to New Orleans that they could land. And had they landed here, we could have had a tropical storm park on us for several days and dropped 20 plus inches of rain. It happens all the time. And so at that moment, we made a decision internally that we owed our citizenry proactive action, which is why Spring Street is not paved today. So my reason for framing this is that putting it in over a couple of years is going to delay the stress, actually. I mean, we're just waiting one more day to fix something that's been broke. And much like a number of the infrastructure needs that we'll talk about through the budget, I equate it to kicking the can down the street. And you can kick the can down the street so long until there's just no street left to kick the can. And we've shown you some drainage culverts, and I joked with Wesley and Trey when we were out there, it's yard art. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so I think in those instances, there's no more street left to kick that can. And so we have debated this internally. We have struggled over this $7 to $9 because I absolutely understand for some of our citizenry, this is a huge burden. It is not lost on us. But I can't squeeze any more out of the turnip. We have squeezed it to the point that we're overworked. We've done all we can with what we got, and it's just flat not enough. So if no is an acceptable answer to the citizenry who are calling and complaining about drainage, if no is an acceptable answer, then let's not do anything. Because we're to that point that we can't fix the streets the way I know y'all want them fixed, the way downtown is demanding that they be fixed with the other things, because there's just so much of Trey and his folks to go around, and we are literally prioritizing priorities. But I would say to you that it's a utility, it's a consumption, it's based on impervious cover. We can calculate that impact, and to the extent we can make that fair, we want to do that with that sophisticated calculation. This is the starting point. As we get in, we'll learn more. I'm going to be very candid with you and tell you I don't think $350,000 a year is enough.
I agree.
I don't think it's going to be quick enough. And I think when Trey and his team gets in there, I think that they're going to find some things that are going to add to the expense. They're going to be bigger than we anticipated. And I think this is the starting point, and I think it's going to take more time than we anticipated, because we don't know what we don't know until we get there. So,
To be clear,
yes.
I support it. I just would like to, and if you don't think that's enough, then let's say 500. If this isn't enough, and because of all of us who've lived in Bastrop a long time, this has been an issue for decades, and for decades it has not been addressed. So if 350 is not enough, then say 500 or say 750. All I'm saying is, whatever you choose that number to be on a residential level, I personally would prefer to tie it to the value of the property. That's all I'm saying. If you can't do it, then do the $7 to $9, or if it's illegal, then do the $7 to $9 or whatever. But I personally would like to tie it to value.
That's going to be hard to put over on the taxpayers, just tying it to your property value. They're coming over with this assessment fee for each SUE, which is a fair way to present it to the public, than tying it to the value of their property.
Well, so if you tie it to the SUE, is that usage?
It's
The size of the meter.
Size of the meter.
Well, whatever. And then ultimately, this is what I say. I will defer to what you and your knowledgeable staff, based on other cities, recommend. That's just, that's it. Ultimately, I will defer to that. I don't think this needs to be a long, drug-out thing where we talk about it for 6 months. I'm just making a recommendation. If you're like, you know what, that's too complicated, it's not reasonable, there's, fine. But I will ultimately defer to what you and your staff believe is reasonable.
Our citizens have made it pretty clear they want something done and want
Yes.
something done now. I think we should continue on with this process. If we have to build some sort of process into play to mitigate the impact on lower income citizens, then let's do so. But for the greater city, let's go ahead and move on something now, because that's what our citizens expect.
I agree.
And I would make the comment that there was some conversation about some folks, this wouldn't be that much of an impact to them. I would say that most of those folks have a culvert under their driveway that drains. Because if it's causing them problem and causing their home problem, if this is not that much money, they're likely to have fixed that. Some of our folks, the reason it's yard art is because they don't have enough money to do that. And I believe that when you set your baseline, you're going to be spending a good portion of your investment in getting the system in place, which would be replacing that yard art with a culvert. And I would suggest that for $7 a month, you can't get a new culvert put in place.
No way.
So
$7
one way to look at it is for $7, there may be folks that are paying the $7 a month that nothing happened, they see nothing for several months, and there will be folks that it will literally be an answer to a prayer to have that culvert replaced. So just a slightly different perspective.
There's probably not a better time to be talking about this, because we all know what we've gone through in the last couple of years, and there's not a citizen of our city that isn't aware of the problem. So I am supportive of your plan. I do want to make sure for anyone who's tuned in late that a confirmation that we are not taking official votes tonight. We're only drawing consensus for y'all to work with.
That's
Right.
exactly right. And I want to go back and address the comment about, I don't think 350,000 is enough. It's a starting point. One of the things that we want to build into the accountability of this plan is on a routine basis, and most likely it will be monthly this first year. We will come back and we'll be able to tweak our plan as we go. And then we'll also be able to determine how close to the 350,000 number it is. Because if we have 40 weeks worth of work and we run out of money, 4 months into the 12, then it wasn't near about enough. So that's one of the things that we appreciated, that for some, $7 to $9 a month was pushing it. We started with a much lower number. And after Wesley and Trey spent some time out in the field, they came back and said, as much as I hate to say it, because we know the impact, we just, we need to start there. And if it's not as bad as we think, then next year we'll make some adjustments. If it's worse than we think, we'll have a different conversation. But at least it gets us out of the starting gate and gets us to a place we can do something. But yes, we're not committing you, just you've now affirmed it's worth our time to spend the time working on it.
And I think it's a good plan for a start, and it gives us time to look at our budget the next year and the next year and the next year. And if we want to phase from being totally funded by this fee to being partially funded by this fee and partially funded by the ad valorem taxes, it'll allow us to get a mix that still impact immediately the folks that have been getting flooded every time it rains. I think that would be perceived very positively with a minimum impact to most people financially.
Can we agree that doing nothing is not an option?
Not an option. Not an option. I think we've all agreed to move forward with this.
I would like to ask that, I don't think I even need to say this, but I'm going to anyway, that we have a comprehensive education program, information program for our citizens.
That's good, because you're going to be part of it.
Yes, sir. It will be social media. It will be website. We will do some videos in anticipation of this. Colin has worked with a local firm and has already secured drone footage of the entire Gills Branch Creek Basin, because part of what we know we need to do is educate people on the system itself. So often all we see is what's in front of our house, and we don't understand the connectivity that is required to maintain a watershed like Gills Branch. And you saw how big the watershed was for Piney Creek. Piney Creek is going to be its own brand of misery, and it's going to require some commitment from the general fund in the way of taxes to fund a capital improvement program to solve the Piney Creek watershed issue. We know that, but we do know we've got the localized. So to your point, it is a place to start. And when we bring this back to you in July, we'll have a lot of those details worked out and can be more specific. So we appreciate the nod.
And I'm going to bring up something else that I'm going to just right now say that I am for, and that is over the next year or so, we are going to have to raise taxes. That's it. There's just no two ways about it. And it's not because we're trying to build, something new and fabulous. Downtown is desperately needing to be redone. And so I'm for it. And I know it's not going to necessarily be popular, but it's just like this drainage, this utility use fee for drainage, it's necessary.
And if you remember that first slide where she talked about diversifying and your growth, eventually you're going to spread that out over a larger group.
Yeah.
So it won't always be that bad. So just to bring everybody back to the start of the conversation,
Right.
Growing and getting bigger and diversifying your tax base and having more taxpayers, that's absolutely going to take care of that.
Absolutely.
You get to spread it out. We all carry the load.
Yeah.
We're just trying to annex where I live right now. So.
Yeah. And while we're on the subject of drainage, I want to say, Trey, you guys are doing a fine job on Gills Branch. It's looking well, and people are noticing that you guys are out there working on Gills Branch. And we're talking about Gills Branch. We don't want to forget about the Pine Forest, the Tahitian Village runoff, the industrial park. We don't want to forget those areas, so we'll make sure that we keep those areas in mind. I know Gills Branch is number one, but we still want to keep those areas down south on our radar.
Same thing with Shiloh Road and everything that we know we need to address at Hunter's Crossing.
Wesley, do you want to speak to when we anticipate getting the study on Pine Forest 6 from Half and Associates, and then when we're going to get the drainage from them on the rest of it.
That's right. We have Half Associates working on two separate studies. One is studying the Pine Forest Unit 6 area to identify any improvements that are needed to make sure that when Pine Forest Unit 6 is developed, that it's done in a way that makes sense.
And council member, the reason I bring that up is Pine Forest drains into Tahitian and drains into the industrial park. So that will make an impact in a positive way when that is dealt with.
And down to Newton Street and on down.
Yes, sir.
That's right.
And that's
That's
why
right.
these studies are so important. It tells you where you need to focus your resources and where you need to do the work to provide the best benefit. With drainage systems, it's very easy to think you need to focus on one area when if you focused on another area, you may not be working in front of that person's house that doesn't have a culvert, but you are directly benefiting the drainage in front of their property because it makes it
That Pine Street
more efficiently.
bridge that we talked about, where there's 60 million gallons of water a minute going through there in a heavy rain, that is a huge choke point that wasn't about that. So that's the kind of
Those
stuff
drainage
like that.
studies are including regional detention
That's
as
right.
well,
yes,
correct?
they're looking at the different. One, they're looking at where the areas of impact are and where the major restriction points are, and then they're also looking at what can be done at those points to remove that restriction as much as possible. And then they're also doing a cost-benefit analysis to make sure that we're spending our money wisely when it comes to that level of benefit.
Let me ask you a question. So we were talking on Tuesday about all these park studies. And now tonight, we talked about this connectivity. It seems to me that the improvements that we make in our parks, the money that we spend on connectivity can be integrated into drainage so that we have more availability of funds. Is that reasonable or not?
And that's a great point. You can build many of these drainage features into an amenity. You
exactly
see
right,
cities
yeah.
all over the place
That's what I'd really like to see.
that incorporate.
Yeah.
It may be a large detention pond, or a sports field, or a running track,
Soccer field.
anything. But during a large rain event, it fills up with water and does its thing during that storm, and then goes right back to.
I'm delighted that you are saying that because we have internally looked at creating a level of sustainability. One of the things that's always a challenge for any community is how do you take the negative and turn it into a positive? And I think we've all heard that it's the same coin with two different sides. Your strength is also your weakness. So when we've been analyzing all of our strengths and our weaknesses and how do we manage it, drainage is always important topic of conversation. And so one of the conversations that we had internally early on when I got here is, the very thing that causes us to have drainage problems is the way we have been raised to believe you have to develop. And that's with the sea of parking. That when you look at the parking lot, even on the, Black Friday, when everybody in the world goes out to shop, it's still not full. But yet our standards require we have all this huge amounts of parking. And traditionally, the way we've managed that is with these big detention ponds. Now, as an engineer, he loves them. They're very efficient. As city manager, I hate them because they're code enforcement nightmares, and who wants to live next door to that? So then it becomes you're combating your property values, which we need to raise, and it's a catch-22. It's the same side of a different coin. So we spent some time brainstorming of how do you get out of that cycle? How do you get out of that cycle? So we've been working with BEDC and Sean, and we've actually hired an engineer to try to figure out this question. And hopefully in the next week or so we get an answer back, and then we'll be asking you to modify our codes, particularly in the area of where the Seton Hospital is going to be. Agnes is the backage road to the service road on 71. And that whole area, we debated this, and what we determined is instead of having a regional detention pond that just sits out there and gathers weeds, is a code enforcement issue, is to create a series of drainage ditches that actually are built to be pedestrian walkways. So what you'd have is a ditch that would handle a certain size event, and along the edge would be the sidewalks. Well, now what you've got is connectivity again to all of the properties. Well, what a great amenity to the Seton Hospital to promote wellness and walkability again. And when it's raining and the water's high, you're probably not going to need the sidewalks, so they can act as detention until such time they drop off. So we're looking at drainage standards that are different, out of the box, not the traditional way that we do things, because frankly, in all cases, I'm not sure it's the right answer, but it's the standard answer. So I appreciate you saying that. We are trying to get out of our box, and we'll be bringing you something to consider in the near future.
And the opposite side of that coin, because there's a part of me that also likes large detention ponds because they work well in the system, but and you can do smaller ones. What will kill you the other way is so many small ones that are not well maintained, and then the system doesn't work. So there absolutely has to be a balance, but you have to look at the drainage from the watershed standpoint and not from a standalone piece of property. So I will be helping you, Wesley, balance that.
And another piece to that sustainable development approach is looking at that other side of the equation of reducing how much water you have leaving the property to begin with. You know, there are ways to cost effectively develop property in a way that minimizes and in many cases eliminates the need for a detention pond. And so you end up just not needing the same amount of infrastructure that you would normally need, but it just requires more thought put into that overall development and what the needs are.
And Mayor, we're not getting out of the detention pond business. We're going to do regional detention on a smaller scale where it's less obvious than on every piece of property. And you ride by and there's this big honking pond there with weeds in it that drives me to drink. So we'll make everybody happy.
I'm sure that we can
hope
find a happy medium there.
That's right. Mayor and Council, the last item is to receive input regarding additional budget priorities for fiscal year 2018. I think it's already noted we don't have much money, and it's prioritizing the priorities. So really what I'm interested in, and I've noted Councilmember Jones about the basketball nets and the courts and the additional lights, that falls in the same bandwidth of we've got a lot of things that we're just frankly not maintaining well. So I appreciate the nod that we are going to have to raise taxes. Part of what we'll do over the course of this next year through our work plan and conversations is developing some standards and expectations of what is the standard of care the city wants, because then that helps us price it. And as I tell people, you can have any standard you want. It's commensurate with your pocketbook. And so I think that's an important journey for us as a community to take. We'll be doing some town hall meetings where we physically take City Hall to the people, and those are the kinds of conversations we're going to have. We're already working on a schedule for next year for the budget process, and there are going to be opportunities to engage the public on what are your capital improvement requests. What services would you like that you're not getting, so that we can capture that data and bring you that information, because as policy makers, that's your choice as to where the money goes. And so I'm delighted at the reception that y'all have about being willing to solve the problem, so we can pick the can up and finally throw it in the garbage instead of continuing to kick it down the street because we're running out of pavement. So with that comment, I have Councilmember Jones's needs, but are there other things that we've not talked about that or something you would like considered for inclusion?
I got a couple of things. One, I'd like to see that we have plugged into our budget adequate services to do. Well, you talked about the mowing along right-of-ways, mowing the concrete and things like that. But along with that is litter. We have a litter issue in this town that it's that blue toilet. It's there and you've seen it so much you don't even look at it anymore, but other people do see it. And so I'd like that to maybe be a priority to our budget to make sure we got enough staff to deal with that. What else did I have in mind? I had something else. Oh, one of my favorite subjects is a system for this room so that people can hear what's going on here, whether we're on this end of the hall or on that end of the hall, and from the dais that you can actually hear what's going on at the other end of the dais. And potentially, we talked about a control system that would do the agenda and the voting and all of those new things. And I would suggest that maybe that be a phased-in thing. Say this year we'll do sound, next year we'll upgrade with the IT, or the next year whatever. But that we have a plan to make this room work better than it does right now.
Councilmember Peterson, do you have anything on your list?
Yes, I think everybody knows where I'm coming from. We'll talk about water, wastewater, our infrastructure, our piping underground, and our streets. I'd hope that we don't wait to have a pipe break underground and go and put a patch in and continue on out of sight, out of mind. But it's time to start replacing some of this old infrastructure. Oh, we will inherit Highway 71 after new construction. I know it's going to happen, isn't it?
Sure.
Maintenance?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Councilmember Ennis, do you have anything on your list?
My list has already been finely tuned, and it's called Comprehensive Plan. And I think I charge all of us to get it out and sit down with it before we get heavy into our budget, too heavy into our budget talks, and look at the priorities we set with the comp plan and see if they're still real for us at this particular time, and consider them when making our decisions.
Excellent. Councilmember Nelson?
We as a city are catching up, trying to catch up. We're in that catch-up phase. We have an outstanding city staff. I would rather be more ears and less mouth and listen to what they need. But as they express that to us, I would like for them to indicate the value of what they're asking for and what it means to the citizens of this city, both short-term and long-term. So nothing specific, just general.
Thank you.
Just generally, I would like to, and this is just a general comment, whatever we look at spending at Bob Bryant, Fisherman's, I want us to focus on the north side of town. You know, it's not just about what's happening over here. I want equal consideration given to the north side. That has been ignored the entire time I've lived here, it's been ignored, and we've started paying some attention, and I don't want us to let up.
Good point. Thank you, Councilmember Jones. City manager and staff, I think I'm so proud of our dais. I think you guys have all had excellent ideas, and I like that we seem to be in unison as we're moving forward with this. As we review the comprehensive plan and as you visit with your excellent staff, when it comes to choices, again, this goes without saying, public safety. And I'm concerned about fire, and I'm concerned about some of our communication ability, and again, we need to understand where we are and where we need to be, but I do not want to lose sight of overall public safety.
And I appreciate you saying that. I know Chief Adcock appreciates that as well. He has already started working with his team, and one of the high priorities in his work plan for next year is evaluating a comprehensive plan for improving our fire service. I think when people move into our community, they have an expectation for fire service that frankly doesn't exist. And as I give Chief Wambus a hard time about, their toys are not cheap, they're expensive. And so Chief Adcock has already started working with Chief Wambus, and they are putting together a plan, And over the course of next year, you'll have opportunities to visit with them as they bring decision points to you. But he is already working toward how we look at that holistically. So when we make an investment as something like a fire station, it's in the right place, and we're not growing and having to move it 4 or 5 years from now. So there's a lot of things that go into that, but I appreciate you saying that, and that's already at the top of his list for next year, because we're going to be starting to work on next year's budget, and we won't wait until June to have those conversations. We'll have them throughout the year, so that when we get to the budget, y'all have had an opportunity to weigh in way earlier on some of these meaty issues that are very expensive. So the chief's already well underway on that topic.
Thank you very much. I'd like to really thank you and staff. Just an excellent presentation. And because I always want to give homework, I would love for this to be in our Dropbox. We are going to be in the public, and they're going to ask us questions, and it would be lovely to have these slides so that we can refresh ourselves and know exactly, and because we do not want to be repeating bad information. But I know that's an easy thing to do because it exists, but I would just ask that you add that to our Dropbox.
Will do. Thank
you. We are done with the posted agenda. I appreciate everyone giving up some of their Thursday night. It is 8:32, and we are now, do I need a motion to adjourn? It was a workshop. We're out. I second.